This title is what Olaf gave me. How courts support climate activism and politicization of science. That works. Okay. Yesterday we agreed on the fact that we are in a climate war, which started with UN, IPCC, NGOs, and activists, and this is unanimously supported by all kinds of media all over the world. And climate litigation, that means going to court with climate cases, is now a fast-growing industry driven by specialized law firms and NGOs. And I will give you some typical examples of the law firms and the NGOs. And the censorship is total. And I think we can say for a fact that courts actually rule on incorrect science today, all over the world. This is today's backdrop. Everybody agrees also in court that we have a climate crisis and there is code red and there is everything. And the public discourse is characterized by activism, sometimes even outright lies, and censorship. Now, the activism comes from the top. The chief activist himself is, of course, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. The era of global boiling has now arrived, and that was 2 years ago. So that's him. I think we can safely consider that to be a lie. He's a liar. John, you agree he's a liar? Yeah, sure. And look at this. This is Melissa Fleming, who is the Chief Information Officer of the UN. And they have had an agreement with Google emails and Google search and so on, that says that, we own the science. UN, together with Google, own the science because they can do censorship in a lot of platforms. So, what is the status of climate litigation today? Yes, that stems from the UN, mark my words, UN, the UN Environment Programs. And you can see here,
it's sensitive. Careful.
Yeah. Well, the UN Environment Program, they issue a global climate litigation report. And key words from this report is that activists go to court to combat climate change. And status as of December 2022, there were 2,180 climate cases in 65 jurisdictions. And there are children, youth, women groups, local communities, and indigenous people, they go to court. And this report is an essential tool for everyone that will understand the current litigation practice. But we have an update here from Norton Rose Fulbright and climate litigation update. And as of July 2025, the total number of climate change cases filed globally has reached 3,099, up from 2,500 in July 2023. So you see, there is really a lot of cases going on. And here you have an overview. This is not complete, but you can see that there are climate cases almost everywhere. You can see, for instance, in United Kingdom, there is 133. In China, only 4. And in Russia, only 1. So maybe we should go to Russia. Yes. And from the Norton Gross Fulbright page, we have the key trends in climate litigation, and they are accelerating in magnitude and geographical reach. And we now have landmark judgments, which sometimes, even in the case of loss, have shifted norms and expectations with regard to the states who have obligation, polluter accountability for future emissions, and if that was not enough, also liability for past emissions. So that is going to be big money to pay, and shareholder behavior, and much more. So let's look at the verdicts handed out in the most recent climate lawsuits and some of the consequences. You know about this landmark ruling from the International Court of Law, and this was announced a few days before in the press, so everybody waited for these judges to come forward with a ruling. But let's look at the background again. There were activists who started this process. There was a group of law students from law-laying Vanuatu Island in the Pacific Ocean. They came up with this idea in 2019. And activists and climate lawyers now hope that this verdict will open for compensation from the big emitter countries which are responsible for the climate change. States can now sue each other for climate damages. And this I have from the BBC, which is a very good alarmist source, one of the best. Like NRK, they have a solid staff of climate journalists or activists. And now this court totally relies on IPCC. IPCC, which gives the best available science on causes, course, and the consequences of climate change. And the court says that this science is incontroversial and consensual. Extreme weather events are more frequent and more serious now. Natural habitats are destroyed, and this, of course, leads to the extinction of species. Human life and health is in grave danger, and the consequences lead to immediate existential threats. I've been reading the court documents. So we have terrible times ahead, guys. Now, this is a head of a court, and the top court now says that treaties, international treaties, compel wealthy nations to curb global warming. And he said that failing to comply with climate change treaties is now a breach of international law. But luckily, this is not binding, but you can be sure that many states will now use this. Look at the date here. That is July 23. Now, this is, I think this is the day after. UN's top court says failing to protect planet from climate change could violate international law. And only the day after the ruling, July 24, the very first demands came for climate change compensation. And from where? A low-lying island. Britain can dodge climate lawsuits if it pays UN, Vanuatu lawyer says. And this woman says UK needs to contribute more to global warming reparations and fund. So these guys are not the only one asking for big money. Look at this guy, the Taliban's top environmental official wants the UN to include Afghanistan. Extreme weather and water scarcity are having a profound impact on people's life and economy. And Afghanistan is severely affected by climate change. So maybe climate change is the root cause of Afghan poverty. Can you believe that? I can't. Well, there are some good commenters, and many of us know Bjørn Lomborg of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. He writes a lot of posts in Washington Post, among the other papers, and he says, there's good news now for lawyers in this landmark climate ruling, but not for the climate. And he says on Twitter, the International Court of Justice landmark climate ruling misreads both science and economics. It exaggerates climate risks and disregards the immense human benefit of fossil fuels, from feeding billions to lifting people out of poverty. And this is all true, of course. And it will trigger costly litigation while doing little to advance real climate solutions. Now, we come to the role of the climate lawyer and the climate judge, because for the young people to win a climate lawsuit, there has to be good and well-trained lawyers. Let's have a look at this. Torsten Sandström, a Swedish professor emeritus, he said, strong political currents are breathing down the judges' necks, and judges shall not engage in politics, should not do that. But the personal views of the judges can or will influence a case. Judges can be lured into political activism, and that is exactly what happens. Now, education of climate lawyers. The right education of climate lawyers is essential. An example education provider is the Environmental Law Institute. Mark that name, the Environmental Law Institute, with a project, CJP, the Climate Judiciary Project. Let's look at that. Here we have the institute, and we have this Climate Judiciary Project. They have a 13-module climate science and law for judges curriculum. So they educate climate lawyers. And here is an overview about the curriculum, how climate science works. They explain exactly how the climate works, they know it. And what is causing climate change, they know it, that's the CO2 emissions. And let's look at this. They actually have a course, Climate Litigation 101. And I look at that course, it's good. It's frightening good. So it's easy to begin to understand why the lawyers are winning in court. Well, I'd say that's not a complete course. That is a bunch of 51 slides, and it is tended to be used for a 1 or 2 day seminar. But that will be enough to indoctrinate the lawyers. They also have another course called Climate Science 101, which is a good CO2 course. CO2 course. Now, here you can see some of the fact sheets. They are providing all kinds of tools for the judges. What is clean energy? Economics and clean energy affect solving the climate problem. You see, it's easy to solve the climate problem. You can just look at this fact sheet. And who is impacted by climate change? And let's look at one of these, the fact sheet on consensus. They say that virtually all scientific evidence find that climate change is caused by human activity. And there has a diagram here with all the points, the arrows are pointing to make up a convergence of evidence. And you know, a scientific consensus trumps everything. Now, there's another course. You know, there are many course providers in this area. One of them is this British Institute of International and Comparative Law, and they also have courses like this, for instance, this short course on climate change litigation. So there is actually a lot of indoctrination going on out there. However, the education of climate lawyers has also been exposed. Lucky for us. You know this guy, Anthony Watts, on the webpage, what's up with that? He got hold of this, that education of climate lawyers are exposed, and that concerns the CJP, Climate Judiciary Projects. Look at this, from climate gate to courtroom, how climate activists tip the scales of justice. And Unearthed Chat sheds light on cozy ties between judges, climate activists, raising ethical concerns. So this is true. Somebody has found this out. And on this web page, I found this comment on the CJP programs. It is far from being an innocuous or innocent continuing education effort. It is a systematic campaign to get judges to set aside the rule of law and rule instead according to a predetermined political narrative. This is a reality as we have it today. And we have this geologist, Ian Plimer, which some of us know. He has been in court a lot of times, and he says that every time I'm required to give evidence as an expert witness, I am surprised at the total ignorance of matters of science displayed by lawyers and the bench. Well, so now we come to the climate law firms, the aggressive climate law firms, and it's a case that successful climate litigation takes well-trained and experienced law project groups. So they make project groups to go into each of the cases. And an example law firm is Our Children's Trust. I think this is one of the worst. We will comment on two important OCT lawsuits later on. Our Children's Trust is a non-profit law firm that represents youth plaintiffs in constitutional lawsuits against governments for climate change and federal, state, and global legal actions. And we will look at two of their cases. Here you see the webpage of Our Children's Trust, Securing Children's Fundamental Climate Rights. That sounds noble. And this is the first case I will go into, youth power litigation. There was a climate case in the state of Montana called Held versus Montana. And on December 18, 24, the Montana Supreme Court upheld Judge Seeley's decision, ruling that the state violated the youth plaintiffs. I will comment more on that shortly. Well, I will cover only the latest part, which took place in 2024. There were 16 young plaintiffs versus the state of Montana. Together with Our Children's Trust, which won the case because Montana's Supreme Court ruled 6-1 that the Montana state policy for fossil fuels has broken young people's constitutional right to a clean environment. Why did the state of Montana lose? Well, case one is that our Children's Trust had prepared for well-skilled children's tearful statement in court, sitting there and crying how they had been influenced by climate change with wildfires, evacuation, extreme temperature and droughts, and fear for lost future and feeling of lost control. Right? That's terrible. Of course, the judges saw it and it went right into them. Well, and cause number two is that our Children's Trust had very compelling expert testimonies. This guy, S. Running, he was used to be with the IPCC. He was an expert. He testified on the greenhouse effect, climate change, and its severe impact on Montana. And he said also that Montana alone emits more than some countries. So this really must be bad. And 7 experts proved the consensus about CO2 emissions lead to climate change, and climate change again leads to serious damage. Well, Montana's defense was very poor. The only official defense statement was this: climate changes are global, so Montana's role is unimportant. But the court did not listen to that. And also, I happen to know this case because I was in some way involved with it. We have this author from the journal, Dr. Ed Berry in Montana. He was writing an amicus brief, processskriv, to the court. Very well written, and I had communicated with him a lot, so he asked me if I could read it and if I could please sign it. I read it and I signed it, so I was basically a part of the defense. Well, but Ed had organized basically a good defense, but Montana governor refused to use Dr. Judith Curry. She was noted as a climate denier who was supposed to give testimony but not called. And also Dr. Curry's written statement was also excluded. And Dr. Ed Berry's comprehensive and science-based amicus brief was left out by the state, and the undersigned was one of the signatories. And Berry also provided a list of 12 experts who were also excluded. So, you know, this is really skewed. There was no rightness or something in this. Is the battery out here? It doesn't work here. I have some water.
You gotta throw your laser over. Is it correct now?
Yes, no. And again, why Montana lost the case? Plaintiffs' expert witnesses with massive documentation showed that there is consensus that CO2 destroys the climate. So now we have an accelerated climate crisis where the children's future is ruined. And Montana's defense, as I just showed you, was terribly bad. And the judges were prejudiced and without climate competence at all. The judges have probably taken Climate Litigation 101 or some of the other 12 modules. Now, there's another upcoming case from our Children's Trust using the same project group. Lighthizer versus the Trump administration, and this is going to be extremely interesting. But this is also filed in Montana, and this could be serious. Why in Montana? Because filed in Montana because the judges will probably just repeat the Held versus Montana ruling. Reuse of processes and lawyers in a new case. And there we have 22 crying youths versus the Trump administration. And the preliminary hearing will be on September 17. So this could be tough for Trump, but I think he will find some good expert witnesses if he wants to. Youth power litigation, Lighthizer versus Trump. Now we come to the NGOs. They are overzealous activists collaborating with various groups that would never have been able to bring a lawsuit themselves. Example NGO is, of course, Greenpeace. Greenpeace, November 2024. They took garbage from a Brazil river and dumped it in the Equinor boss's private garden in Sandnes, and said that CEO Oppedal is a pivotal driving force who destroys the climate. And the local police was there, and they just quietly observes. They dare not at all intervene. The case was reported, but the police weighed the disadvantages for Oppedal against the right to free speech. And the great seriousness of the matter justifies this action. Can you believe that? Well, Greenpeace uses a standardized package. They are a virtual wholesaler, grossist in climate litigation. We have this case, which I will comment, Greenpeace Norden and Natur og Ungdom versus Norway. And they have Klimaseniorinnen versus Switzerland, and they won that. Greenpeace Netherlands and Cities of Bonaire versus Netherlands, United Kingdom, Spain, France, Netherlands, Royal Dutch Shell. So they are very active. And we have this new Norwegian climate lawsuit, the final part. I have in some way been involved in that too, because I've written an amicus brief to the court, but I don't think that the judges even looked at it. That's my suspicion. Greenpeace intends to stop oil and gas extraction at 3 fields, Tyrving, Breidablikk, and Yggdrasil. And Greenpeace claims that the extraction is illegal because the resulting damages have not been investigated. As we can see, I did this investigation on the back of an envelope. It's basically easy, but none of the guys in court understand that. So, the total gross combustion emissions over 10 to 20 years are only 464 megatons of CO2. So that's the combustion emissions from in the countries who buy this oil and gas. So these are not emissions in Norway. So Greenpeace presents expert witnesses who prove that the damages of these emissions are devastating for the children of the planet. And let's see how they do it. We will now study 2 expert testimonies from one, a Dr. Wynn theory. He's using deeply flawed methods in detection and attribution to prove that so and so many kids are going to die. And we have a well-known Dr. Helge Drange, a famous activist, using selective information in court, speculative biased graphs, no mention of natural variation. He negates CO2 saturation and uses scary and unfounded tipping points. Well, let's look at the common physical basis for the whole case, also for Dr. Thierry and Dr. Drange. They start by calculating the temperature increase resulting from 464 megatons CO2. To do that, they use the TCRE parameter from IPCC, which is 0.45 degree centigrade per 1,000 gigatons of CO2. And then they get the answer, the temperature increase is 0.0002 degrees. But they forget about the airborne fraction, which is actually circa about 0.5, and because only half of the emissions stay in the atmosphere, so that the resulting temperature actually is 0.0001 degree centigrade. That is the total temperature increase over 10 years. What does that actually mean? This means a global warming of 0.0001 degree per year over a 10-year period. This means it takes 50,000 years to reach 0.5 degree warming. Can you believe that? And the court firmly believes that this leads to irreparable harm for the world's children. Well, the courts believed that. Expert witness one for Greenpeace, Dr. Wim Thierry, a climate scientist focused on modeling extreme events, and he's also, according to his own webpage, a leading climate science communicator. And he uses attribution methods to accurately calculate the heat-driven damages. We will discuss only one out of four partial statements given by Thierry related to partial question number 3. Let's have a look. Question number 3. How many heat-related deaths are expected worldwide until 2100 due to these emissions? And remember, 0.0001 degrees centigrade. Theory says 100,004, 645. No more, no less. That's the answer for the court. And the court believed it. Can you believe that? Well, it's incredible. Now, we come to another one, expert witness for Greenpeace, Dr. Helge Drange. He is a professor, he is a specialist in climate modeling and sea level change and so on. Here we have the questions he replied to over some 40 or 50 pages in his written testimony. I don't want to go into that. It is not necessary. It's possible to debunk Drange just by pointing to 6 or 7 fatal flaws. Well, Drange is actively misleading the court. There is no mention of natural variation or no mention of the CO2 history. So this is actually a picture of the climate during 10 or 11,000 years after the last ice age. And in more than half of the time over these thousands of years, the temperature was higher than today. And also in the climate optimum period, Norway was ice-free, as was the Alps in Germany and Austria. And he says that the CO2 has never been as high as it is today. But if you look at this from the CO2 coalition, you see that the current level is here. And actually, if the CO2 level goes down by 60 or 65%, all vegetation will die, and so will we. So actually, it's not so wrong to say that the CO2 level is critically low. Well, ocean heat content, growth, and temperature. He uses this slide. He says rightly that approximately 90% of the heat from the sun is coming into the ocean. And he presents this graph, which is terrifying. And when you look at this, the temperature increase has been 350 exajoules, a number with 21 zeros. 21 zeros, and that is, of course, very serious and goes right home with the court. But the truth is, if you look at Climate from You, from a friend, Ole Humle, if you look at the Argo boys, we can see that over the 18 years now, there's only 0.002 degrees centigrade per year. So he could have presented this, but did present that. He is weaponizing his testimony. And Drang says, observations and models are finally good enough to link extremes to human emissions. And the court believes that. But that is wrong for a multiple of reasons. It is a scientific fact that observations are no proof of cause. And so is statistics. Statistics is no proof of cause. Statistics is descriptive, not causative. Wrong number two, the climate models are failing. I will show you that on the next slide. And the detection and attribution methods are flawed. So this I got from Intel and Ross McKittrick. It's the CMIP6 model analysis. You see here the red curves with error bars over here that are the model outputs, and the blue ones are the actually observed time series. So you can see we discussed that yesterday also. So the models are seriously flawed. Well, and he talks a lot about tipping points. You know, tipping point is very dangerous. It's an irreversible process which, when a parameter has crossed a critical limit, there are cases or phenomena which will never go back again. So tipping points are a large and real worry for warming of the Earth's climate change. Drang said in court that 7 tipping points exist where probability will increase from possible to probable when the temperature rises from 1.5 to 2 degrees. Mark my word, when the temperature rises from 1.5 to 2 degrees. 5 of those tipping points will affect Norway directly. And I've read the court documents. No, this is from IPCC. This is from AR6 SPM, where the tipping points are mentioned in the text only 2 times, like this. There is limited evidence for low likelihood, high impact outcomes involving tipping points under high greenhouse gas emission scenarios. That was 1 sentence, and next, abrupt responses and tipping points of the climate systems, such as strongly increased Antarctic ice sheet melt and forest dieback, cannot be ruled out with high confidence. And only this, the 3rd time, it was just in a footnote. So there was no big deal in AR6 on tipping point. But listen to this. In Drange's written statement, tipping points is used no less than 20 times. It scared the hell out of the judges. And I read from the court documents that this grave danger is adopted by the district court, and in its ruling, tipping points is used 13 times, and also they wrote in the court, tipping points are far above the threshold for materiality. So they believe that there's a good chance that we will now very soon have some tipping points. And there is no mention in the ruling of the fact that the tipping points are associated with a temperature increase from 1.5 to 2 degrees, while the emissions in question will give a rise of 0.0001 degree centigrade. Ladies and gentlemen. And Drange says that CO2 is the most important contribution to man-made warming. Drange says warming CO2 reduces emission to space. That is half true, but the effect is limited because we have the saturation effect. CO2 is the most important factor in global warming. That is dead wrong. Water vapor and clouds are far more important. Very large quantities of CO2 is added to the atmosphere, but the fact is only 5% of the yearly carbon cycle is due to our emissions. And it says that 20% of emissions will stay in the atmosphere and contribute to warming in more than 1,000 years. Dead wrong, the E-time is about 4 years. And it also says, and the court repeats that, every ton counts, every ton gives the same warming. Happer says CO2 levels is now into saturation, and this is from Happer. You see that the first parts of CO2 give some warming, and it's reduced continuously. And this is from Cork Hayden, who is writing on Weingarten and Happer for the public. So you see that we have a saturation effect, and we are up here. So a doubling of CO2 today is nothing much. And there is now yet another climate lawsuit. They are targeting Trump's scientific climate panel and the new Department of Energy climate report. Here we have this report, a critical review of impacts of greenhouse gas emissions of the U.S. climate. And we all know these people, Judith Curry, Roy Spencer, Ross McKittrick, John Christie, and Stephen Coonan. They are all great scientists. Top-tier independent scientists, I would say, or, as the press already says, they are hand-picked contrarians who misrepresent science, right? Actually, there is, on one web page, they said that, okay, these guys are doing a good job, but the public shall not know about that. So there are two institutes now suing the court administration, the Trump administration, and science. Well, you see here from the journal Science, actually, a comment from the journal Science. Contrarian climate assessment from U.S. government draws swift pushback. Researchers say that the Department of Energy report cherry-picks data to downplay the threat of greenhouse gases. And this is a comment in Science. And now we have the Environment Defense Fund, and we have the Union of Concerned Scientists, which is well known in Norway, are suing the Trump administration. Okay, 5 minutes. So here we have the Union of Concerned Scientists. There is 9 ways to counter disinformation now that the Trump administration has made it use climate policy. And look at this. This is from the Department Environmental Protection, and they are writing ExxonMobil protection. And this is from the other organization, the Environmental Defense Fund. The Trump administration is wiping out scientific data on climate change. The data heroes are ready to attack. And they will sue the Trump administration because of its secret creation of this group, overturns overwhelming scientific consensus, overturns pollution limits, misrepresents research, hides fossil fuel ties, and violates the Federal Advisory Committee Act's transparency rules. And this is from an article on Clinton. When science fails, they call the lawyers. And this is something else. I think that's all for me.